let's understand the real services between AWS. If some of you, if some of you who knows, who have already gathered knowledge on AWS, you guys can easily relate some of the services of Azure. And people who have joined us, who are going through the Azure course, they can easily relate some of the services with AWS. Now I tell you what happens in the background. The background is that it is actually a cloud computing. Okay, cloud concepts, you would say. Okay, so all these clouds, let's say GCP, Google Cloud, Amazon Web Services, AWS, Microsoft Azure, all these clouds are made up of the same concept. So they have the same concept in the background. Only thing what they have done, they have created their own services and started selling those services to different organizations, to different individuals. So if you tell me that, oh, Azure is actually a very different cloud, I will say no. In the background, it is actually using the same concept. So if someone actually comes to me and tell me that, hey, Naman, I would like to go for AWS and Azure course, I always say, if you know one cloud, knowing another cloud is going to be a very easy job. It's not going to be very difficult that you are attending two different courses, like separately, but it will be easier for you to understand. So always remember, it is actually cloud concepts, which is in the background. And apart from that, these big organizations, these are the big fishes, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, these are big players in the market. What they have done, using these cloud concepts, they have created multiple services. So cloud concepts are actually same, but they have created multiple services and they are selling it. Okay. So now if I talk about product, so you can say these are the concepts. Okay. And these are the services they created, like Amazon has created these many services, Microsoft have created these many services, though they are doing the same job. So if we say Amazon EC2 instance, that is actually a virtual server. And in Microsoft Azure, we call it as virtual machines, which is VMs. Okay. So in Amazon Web Services, we call it as instances. And in Microsoft Azure, we call it as VMs. Though both are same. So the way you create Amazon Web Services EC2 instance, in the same way, you will be creating Microsoft Azure virtual machine. Both are same, virtual server in the cloud. Okay. So always remember, the concept is same. They have created the service and selling it. So if you know one cloud, learning another cloud will be a very easy job for you. Now, after that, we know, okay, if we want to create virtual server in Microsoft Azure, we will call it as virtual machine. Okay. Now, next thing is platform as a service. So platform as a service is actually a very bigger concept where the cloud provides the platform and we use it as a service. So in Amazon Web Services, we call it as Beanstalk, but in Microsoft Azure, we call it as cloud services. There are a lot of cloud services like web app services, a lot of services we call, which comes under cloud services. So Beanstalk, the work which Beanstalk does, can be done with cloud services of Microsoft Azure. After that, we have the serverless. Now, many of you who have actually completed the course with us on AWS, you are already aware what is serverless. So serverless means that you're not worried about your server. Cloud provider, whether it is Amazon or Microsoft, they are taking care of servers. You are worried only about your application. That is serverless. So now, if you really want a serverless service from Amazon, you will use Lambda function. If you want to use Microsoft Azure, then you will call it as Azure functions. So both Lambda and Azure functions, they do the same job of having a serverless architecture. So if you want to create a serverless architecture, in case of Amazon Web Services, you will involve Lambda. In case of Microsoft Azure, you will call it as Azure functions. So next time when you go in the interview and interviewer by mistake ask you that how will you do serverless architecture in Microsoft Azure, you will say, I will use Azure functions. Now don't go in depth if you don't know it, but you can still showcase your knowledge that though I don't have the deep knowledge in Azure, but I know how it works because you already have knowledge about AWS. And the vice versa with someone who knows Azure but doesn't know AWS. If you know services, you can talk about it. Okay. Docker management. I'm not sure how many of you is aware about Docker management, but it is actually to have a microservice-based architecture. So Docker and Kubernetes are used for microservice-based architecture. For Docker, we use ECS, Elastic Container Service in AWS, and in Microsoft Azure, we call it container service. So ECS, Elastic Container Service in AWS, and Microsoft Azure, we call it as container service, Microsoft Azure Container Service. And the same goes over here, EKS, Elastic Kubernetes Service, and Kubernetes Service. Now, how do we store a lot of data in AWS? With the help of S3. A lot of people might be aware about it. And even the people who come from an Azure background, you might know that block blob can store a lot of data. Okay. So S3 and blob are considered to be the data lake where you can store like a lot of amount of data, lot of amount of petabyte of data, or exabyte of data, which is like thousands of GBs, or you can say a lot of GBs of data you can store and dump into S3 or blob. So in Azure, we have a service called blob, and in AWS, we have a service that is called as S3. They have the same purpose. Okay. They have the same purpose, and you can just dump your data. Now, archiving storage. Now, you know what? There are a lot of files. There are a lot of files which are used very infrequently. We might not even use it in future. Okay. So we tend to archive those files. So let's say that you're working for an organization, and while you're working for that organization, you realized that this particular file might not be used, or this particular data, we might not use it, but for a safer side, we want to keep it for future. So that is why if we are using AWS, we can use Glacier service for archiving storage. And if you're using Azure, then you can go for Azure Archive Storage. So we call it as archive storage. So if you can see, Microsoft Azure has kept very simple names, and AWS has kept little tricky name. If you look at like virtual server is known as virtual machines, cloud services, Azure functions, container service, Docker service. So they have kept a very, very simple name to remember. But at the same time, AWS names are a bit tricky to remember. They have actually, added this Elastic a lot, and they are using the services name. But in Microsoft Azure, they kept a very, very normal and very easy to remember names of their services. File storage. So I'm not sure how many of you knows this, but if let's say there are multiple servers, okay, let's say that there are multiple servers, and these servers would like to share a common place. Okay, let's say this is server 1 and this is server 2, and they want a common drive to share everything. Then you use file storage service. So in AWS, that file storage service is known as EFS, Elastic File Service. And in Microsoft Azure, you call it as Azure Files. Now, after that, global content delivery. Global content delivery is also a very important concept, which most of the organization, they use it. So in global content delivery, what happens that, let's imagine this is the world map. Okay. So over here, let's imagine this is United States, this is India, and this is Africa. Now, you want to keep the data, or you want to keep the website close to your audience. If your audience are here, then you would like to keep your application over here so that they can access it. If you keep your website here and your audience are here, then it will take longer time for your audience to reach your application. So with the help of global content delivery, what you can do, you can spread your application across the globe, or you can spread the data across the globe. So what will happen? The user who is coming from Africa, he will access Africa server. The user who is coming from India, he will access Indian server. And the user who is coming from US, he will access US server. So what will happen? Users, they do not need to send a request very far. They can send to a closer server to get the quick response. And that is possible with the help of global content delivery. The website, when you open Amazon.com, it opens up very quick. So if I am in India, Indian server will be sending the response to me. If you are in US and you open it, US server is going to send the response to you. So global content delivery is very important for many websites, whether it is Facebook, Netflix, every other organization which is enterprise. They always use global content delivery. And if you want to enable global content delivery for your project, that is done with the help of CloudFront. And in Microsoft Azure, you do it with the help of delivery network. After that, now it's all about data and application. Okay. So when we talk about database, if it is data warehouse means a big place where you can keep a lot of data. In S3, you keep a lot of files. But what if you want to keep a lot of data? There is a difference between files and data. File means it can be image, it can be, it can be video file, it can be audio file. But when we say data, data is just your name. Name is your data. Name is not your file, right? Your phone number is data. Your email address is the data. So there's a difference between data and files. Always remember, it looks same, that files also contain data, but files and data are not same. So S3 and blob, which is object storage, they store files, which means video, audio, and you can say text files. But when we say data warehouse, it contains data. Okay, it talks about only data. So always remember, if you want to create a data warehouse, then you can use RDS, which is the relational database service, or you can use Redshift, which is again another data warehouse. Azure also has a data warehouse, which is SQL warehouse. So over here, we went through this complete list of services. The idea was to explain you that every cloud offers same type of concept, but with a different name. If you understand this, it will be easier and quicker for you to learn any cloud anytime. If I start adding GCP over here, which is Google Cloud, you can learn that cloud within no time. So this is about the AWS and Azure, different services which are offered by both the providers. So AWS and Azure are actually cloud providers, okay, which are made up of different cloud concepts.
Thank you for watching. Switch from non-IT to IT today. Explore www.thinkcloudly.com.